Hi, I'm Jeff Mikels, and I want to help you get back to the Jesus of the Bible. At the end of Matthew 17 is a story that always makes me smile. It says this: after Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, "Doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax?" "Yes, he does," he replied. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. "What do you think, Simon?" he asked. "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others?" "From others," Peter answered. "Then the children are exempt," Jesus said to him. "But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." That's from Matthew 17:24 through 27. When I was younger, I thought this was one of the coolest miracle stories for a couple reasons. First, it was like the other fish-catching miracles. I always loved it when Jesus said, "Hey, do this with your nets," and then they catch a whole bunch of fish. Probably because I'm a terrible fisherman and I basically never catch anything when I go fishing. Maybe that's what I think is cool about it. But actually, this story involves free money. And as a child, that thought was far more exciting to me. The thought of finding free money was always, the thing that would brighten my day if it ever happened, and I could always hope for it also. I didn't have a source of regular income when I was 7, and so I was always on the lookout for change in the couch cushions, lost money in a jeans pocket or jacket pocket, or a birthday card that had gotten buried in my desk somehow. Surprise money is always awesome, but surprise fish mouth money is even more amazing. I love this story also for another reason. You see, Jesus used the surprise fish mouth money to pay his tax. In other words, Jesus got out of paying taxes by using his miracle power. Now, if finding money was the greatest financial reality of my young life, then paying taxes was probably the worst. I might have a single dollar, and that was enough to buy a 99-cent toy, but taxes would push the cost up in my hometown to $1.06, and that would make the toy out of reach for me. The tax prevented my purchase, and therefore it limited my pleasure. But Jesus had miracle get out of taxes power, and I thought that was cool. Now, of course, as a child, I missed the real surprising point of this story. As a child, I just saw Jesus using his miracle power to avoid paying taxes. But the actual text of the story indicates Jesus used his miracle power to obey the paying of taxes. Let's go back a bit to understand what this temple tax really was all about. The command shows up in Exodus chapter 30. I'm going to read some verses from it, starting in verse 11. I'm going to skip a couple and I'll end on 16. But it says this, verse 11, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'When you take a census of the Israelites to count them, each one must pay the Lord a ransom for his life at the time he's counted. Then no plague will come on them when you number them. Each one who crosses over to those already counted is to give half a shekel, according to the sanctuary shekel, which weighs 20 gerahs. This half shekel is an offering to the Lord. Receive the atonement money from the Israelites and use it for the service of the tent of meeting. It will be a memorial for the Israelites before the Lord, making atonement for your lives." Exodus 30, 11 through 13, and then verse 16. The temple tax goes all the way back to the days of the tabernacle. You see, God told Moses that if a census were taken, all the people should bring a specific amount of tax money to ransom themselves at the moment they are counted. This comes from the idea that you would only count people if you wanted to find out how valuable your country was. You count people to determine how many soldiers you have, how many households you have, how many fields and farms and all that kind of stuff. And so when you count people, you're effectively evaluating how wealthy the nation is. And so God was like, if you're going to count the people, I'm going to count the people. And if you think you're valuable, you then need to ransom your life back from me. It's a symbolic way of them saying, God, you really are the source of all that we are. It's not the people who are our resources, it's ultimately God who's the resource. Anyway, we could say quite a bit more about how the Old Testament views census taking. But our purpose today is really to understand the temple tax as it was in Jesus' day. Now, note that this tax was only to be applied whenever a census was taken. If there was no census, there was no need for the tax. But it seems that by the time of Jesus, the tax had developed into a kind of regular, ongoing expectation. And this is why Jesus' response to the temple tax is so amazing. I mean, first of all, we should just acknowledge that the ongoing temple tax was not strictly biblical. It was not really a command from God, and therefore it wasn't really binding on anyone. More than that, consider what Jesus asked Peter. Jesus said, "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others?" And so here's the question for you in response to Jesus' question. When it comes to the temple, who is the true king? Well, God, of course. And so who are the children? Maybe Jesus is talking about all of Israel, but most certainly he's talking about himself. The one Matthew has just spent the last 2 chapters affirming is the Son of God. Multiple times in the book of Matthew, the phrase Son of God is properly applied to Jesus. And so for at least 2 reasons, both because it's invalid and also because Jesus is the literal Son of God as much as anyone could be, Jesus is exempt from this temple tax. And it seems likely that he also wants to include his disciples in that exemption as well. So therefore, Jesus, the all-powerful, divine Son of God, who should be receiving the temple tax and is at least exempt from it, chooses to work a miracle to pay the temple tax. And why does he do it? His own words were, to not cause offense. I mean, Jesus is the supreme Lord over the universe. He's God with us, God in the flesh. He's the target of worship at the temple. There is no way he should have to pay the temple tax. And if anyone is ever going to have the right to offend someone else, it would be Jesus. And yet, because he cares about the conscience of the people around him, especially when it comes to bringing honor and glory to his Father in the context of worship, he submits himself to the earthly rule, even though it's invalid and he's exempt in so many ways. Jesus isn't worried about offending people who are in power, but in this case, where the money will be used for the work of the temple, he actually humbles himself and obeys this earthly rule to not offend people. When I was younger, I worked Saturdays as a referee for a youth basketball league. It was a way for me to make some extra money. Gee, I wonder if there's a theme here, me trying to find a little bit extra money here, talking about a parable where Peter finds some spare money. Anyway, it was a way for me to make some extra money, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and it was a way to get some exercise too over the weekend. I mean, I don't remember much about those games, but I do remember one conversation I had with another referee that has stuck with me to this day. We were talking about his work as a referee in other leagues. He did high school, middle school, and other things like that. And he told me that most of the school games he did were great, but he hated refereeing any games with a team from a Christian school. In fact, he refused to do any games. at a Christian school or involving a Christian school. And since I went to a Christian school, that intrigued me. And so, without telling him about my school, I asked him what his reasons were, why he hated working the Christian school games so much. And his answer was simple. The fans, he said. He proceeded to tell me that of all the schools, the fans, and including the parents at the Christian school games, were the most vicious, the most mean, the most aggressive, the most offensive of any of the fans of any of the games he refereed. The fans at the Christian schools would yell obscenities and threats, and he always felt under attack whenever he worked one of those games. Now, I was embarrassed. So I didn't reveal to him that my school was one of the schools he had mentioned, and his words have lingered with me to this day. And as I've grown older, I've seen this same reality time and time again. It seems there's an attitude among Christians that somehow we deserve special treatment. Perhaps it's because we think we're right when it comes to spiritual matters, and so we get irritated when others think we're wrong. That's just like anyone else. But maybe it's because we believe in things like love and grace and forgiveness. We feel a kind of righteous indignation when we encounter someone else who lacks those attributes of love and grace and forgiveness. Or perhaps we just have a more heightened sense of right and wrong when it comes to rule keeping, and as a result, when someone else breaks a rule, or when we perceive them to have broken a rule, we get all frustrated and judgmental. I honestly don't know what it is, but I've personally experienced what my referee friend told me so long ago. Christians, for whatever reason, often tend to be less gracious than other people, and more willing to cause offense. But Jesus, our King, well, he operated differently. Our King, just to avoid offending people, was willing to pay a stupid tax that he didn't need to pay, and even use miracle power to make it happen. To top it all off, in the first verses of the next chapter, Jesus welcomes little children into his arms and talks about how great they are. The whole society of his day thought children were a nuisance, at least until they were old enough to produce value for the family. But here's Jesus, bringing them close and telling everyone this. He says, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." That's from Matthew 18, verses 3 through 4. Now, Jesus isn't making the point that children are somehow more valuable or more special than adults. Jesus isn't trying to say that children are better than the rest of the people. What Jesus is saying is that his followers are the kind of people who embrace lowly positions. Followers of Jesus, citizens of his kingdom, humble themselves to the point that they see even children as precious, perhaps even higher than themselves. The point isn't that when you get older, you become less valuable. That's not what Jesus is saying. The point Jesus is making is that his followers see everyone above themselves. When you make yourself lowly like a child, when you humble yourself like that, you become eligible for the kingdom of heaven. The reason Jesus emphasizes the behavior towards children is simply because how you treat the lowly reveals who you really are. God, after all, loves everyone. And to him, all of us are insanely lowly. And so God loves the lowly. And so one way to look like God is to lift up the lowly. And to put a child on your shoulders, well, you have to be below them. That's how our King operates. That's how the kingdom operates. That is the way of Jesus. And so I want to take just a moment here in the middle of our journey through Matthew to just recognize the significance of what we've read. Time and time again in Matthew, we have seen Jesus portrayed as the greatest possible king. He's better than David. He's the one to welcome the foreigner. He's the one to extend the boundaries of the kingdom's blessings. He's the teacher above all teachers, bringing encouragement to the poor in spirit, the hungry, and those who mourn. He brings words of challenge and admonition to the religious hegemony of his day. He teaches what is true and what true righteousness is like, what it means to be on God's side and not demand that God be on your side, what it means to cooperate with the Father in heaven, and what it means to see the work of God in your midst right now. Jesus feeds the masses, walks on water, calms storms, heals lepers, raises the dead, and then he goes onto a mountain and is revealed to be the divine being himself, God in flesh, friend of Moses and Elijah. And then when he descends, when he comes back down off that mountain, he goes right back to serving. He heals the sick, he pays his taxes, and he brings a child into his arms. And despite all of this incredible power, from this moment on, Jesus' message in the book of Matthew will grow increasingly difficult. His commands, his instructions, his words will be even more harsh against the people who claim to follow the words of God, but who fail to humble themselves in service to others. He will spend even more intensive energy on talking about how we should serve the lowly and how the high up will be brought low. It's not just that the humble will be the greatest in the kingdom. From this point on, the perspective is that the prideful won't get in at all. And this whole story will eventually culminate in Jesus' own humble sacrifice on a cross before his victorious resurrection and ascension. I tell you what, if you wanted a king to be the bully on your side, Jesus isn't it. He's got incredible power, yeah, but he does not use it the way we want him to. He doesn't use his power to give the powerful more power. He doesn't use his power to give the oppressed their revenge. He uses his power to demonstrate what power is truly for. And it's for lifting the lowly. And once the lowly are lifted, well, then they're to use whatever power they now have to do the same for others. And so with all that said, I want to invite you to be a person like Jesus describes, a person of lowliness, a person of humility, a person who puts others above themselves. You know, back in the days of COVID, I think we all learned a lot about ourselves. We learned if we were going to be people of fear or faith. We feared all kinds of things. We had faith in all kinds of things. We were afraid the disease would kill us. We were afraid the government would take away our freedoms. Listen, we had so many crazy fears and faiths, whether you believed in science or you were just trusting God to protect you or whatever it was. We learned a lot of weird lessons about ourselves during the days of COVID. What we really believed, what we really trusted, and what we were really afraid of. But you know what? The one lesson we were probably supposed to learn, and the one example we were probably supposed to express, is the example of Jesus, the lesson to embrace humility and put someone else above ourselves. In many ways, I think we squandered the opportunity of COVID. The Christian church fell prey to the exact same lies and deceptions and fears and trusts that the rest of the world fell into. And the people who were best equipped to be sacrificially loving toward others in so many ways displayed a selfishness beyond imagination. But you know what? Our opportunities are not entirely in the past. The lessons we learned from COVID, or that we should have learned from COVID, we're actually in the process of learning and living them today. Today, in America, we are right now living under a government that's rejecting humility. It's led by people who are rejecting humility. Lowliness is not the expression of today. Greatness and supremacy are. And therefore, if you're a Christian and you're living in America, I implore you to abandon your desires for greatness and power and supremacy and all those other things that put you on top and us on top, and to join your voice with mine to invite people back to Jesus, to put others on top. Of course, governments are going to do whatever they're going to do. They're going to try to attempt to achieve greatness for themselves. That's just what sinful humans do when they gain power. They try to gain more. That's what we all would do if we are living distant from the will of God, distant from the satisfaction of our Savior, distant from His Spirit. But guess what? Our government is composed of people that we choose. Our government reflects our wishes, and our government, at least to some extent, must listen to us. But actually, don't ever forget that our mission is not to change our government. Our mission is to become like little children, to be lowly and humble, to lift others above ourselves. That's the way of the kingdom. That's the way of Jesus. So I'm going to be honest with you for a little bit. I'm going to challenge you on something, and what I'm about to say will sound completely partisan on one side of the issue. But hear me. What I am talking about is the difference between the way of Jesus being the way of lifting up the lowly, or the way of the world getting on top of others. So I'm going to ask you, do you have someone in your life who believes that this country needs to become great again? Do you have someone in your life who thinks that terrorizing and deporting undocumented immigrants is noble and proper? Do you have someone in your life who thinks that killing people at sea without a trial or a war is honorable? Do you have someone in your life who thinks that capturing a foreign leader and coercing that country to obey our will is a good use of our power? Or is that someone by any chance you? Listen, honestly, it doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum in this country you fall on. All of us are tempted to shoot for power instead of lowliness. But Jesus has given you a calling. Jesus, in His own words, has said, cause no unnecessary offense. Become like a child. Be the lowly one who lifts another up. If you have the opportunity to lift someone with your hands, do so. If you have the opportunity to lift someone with your money, do so. If you have the opportunity to lift someone with your voice or your vote, do so. And if you have the opportunity to influence someone else to embrace the way of Jesus, do so. Oh, I hope this has been encouraging to you. If it has, I bet it would be encouraging to someone else you know too. Of course, if you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this in some sort of podcast app, then you should do whatever that app does. Like, subscribe, thumbs up, leave a comment, whatever it is. And if you do that, then those platforms and their algorithms will do a significant part of the sharing for us. In fact, one of these days, maybe they will actually put this before someone else who really needs to hear this. Maybe we just pray that God uses the algorithm to get this to someone who really needs it. But honestly, you can just share this with someone you know. If you know someone that needs to hear this message, just send it to them, share it with them, point them to it, because ultimately we want to be the people who put Jesus first and help others to do the same. That's what I hope for you, and that's what I hope for me. God bless you as you do so.